Hello and welcome to Micro Live. Today we'll be looking at the drawbacks of modern flat screen technology and the latest research into the flat screen of the future.
And I'm going down to a garden centre where a computer will tell you the name of the plant that grows in the right colour, to the right height and in the right soil for your garden.
While in the States, Freff will be looking at how computers can imitate nature.
Most calculators, digital watches and portable computers use liquid crystal displays, LCDs for short. Now, these were actually a British invention at the University of Hull in the 1930s, but typically we failed to exploit the technology. Last week, though, at the Which Computer Show, we saw a number of new screens. There's a backlit LCD display here from Sharp, and what's called a plasma display from Toshiba. Now, this one uses a crisscross of wires and a gas which is lit up as a voltage is applied across those wires. It's very attractive, but it uses a lot of energy, so it has to be mains powered. And just like a television screen, the whole image has to be redrawn or refreshed many times every second. And that, incidentally, accounts for the flicker that our cameras are picking up. Most screens do have disadvantages. Flicker, for instance, is thought by some to be responsible for much fatigue or eye strain. What we really need is a large but compact, cheap, radiation-free, flicker-free, high-contrast screen which we can easily carry around and which uses hardly any power. Well, on the trail a few weeks ago, Mac went to visit the research and development laboratories of the British company Standard Telephones and Cables, just north of London.
A new computer display screen is being developed here at the STL labs in Harlow, which has significant advantages over the liquid crystal display screens available on current commercial computers. This Data General computer has one of the largest flat screens available today, and it's not all that popular. It has several disadvantages. Firstly, you have to view it at a rather narrow angle. If you move your head, the image can completely disappear. The contrast isn't all that high, and if you switch off the machine, the information disappears. Here, on the other hand, is a working prototype of the new thin flat screen they've developed. It's almost as good as looking at printing on a sheet of paper. The contrast and definition are so good. I can actually view it from any angle, and there's no fall-off in definition whatsoever. Perhaps even more importantly, this little example was connected 3 years ago, and the image is still there and readable. This display requires no refresh. Let's look at how this actually works. We've made a model of the display here with these two sheets of glass, and these are parallel lines of electrically conducting material photographically deposited on the surface of each of the plates. The surface of the plates in the real thing don't have to be optically perfect at all, and so ordinary glass can be used. The real problem was to keep the glass just 11 microns apart. That's about a quarter of the thickness of a human hair. And the solution turned out to be quite simple. They used small pieces of glass fibre threads thrown at random across the surface. We've represented them here by these small pieces of glass tube. The two plates are laid on top of one another like this, and the space in between the two plates is filled with a thick, viscous liquid. Where the lines cross, just like that, that square is in fact 1 pixel. And we can see this on the real thing by looking at it through the microscope. And you can see the real pixels there, and a few bits of the glass fibre. The real secret of the screen lies in this bottle. This is a very particular fluid that's been developed in this lab with very particular properties. A few drops of this is all that's needed to fill a normal-sized screen. When the molecules are lying at random, the light is scattered. When a high frequency is applied across the liquid, the molecules line up and the light can pass through the pixel. When it's switched off, the molecule stares the R and the image remains until a low frequency is passed, when once again the molecules are scattered. This is much simpler than normal liquid crystal displays, which require polarizing filters and an image that has to be constantly regenerated, or as it's known, refreshed. But one problem with this screen is that it needs 200 volts to flip the pixels from one state to the other. The big challenge here comes in providing circuitry that can cope with 200 volts and can connect all the edge connectors from the screen into the computer itself. We can see this on this screen here. On the top here we have 780 connections, down the side 400, giving a total of 1/3 pixels. Well, this makes this extremely expensive to produce, so they've produced a special chip, and you can see them here on this piece of film. When these chips are bonded to the surface, they'll transfer much of the circuitry to the screen itself. enormously reducing the number of external connections which are needed. Once the electronics are miniaturized in this way, the scientists here are confident this screen can be made cheaply, use hardly any power, and end up being very compact. In terms of patenting inventions, the labs here at STC have a good track record. For example, they claim that fibre optics communications were invented here. This is where specially treated glass is drawn out into a thin fibre for use in telecommunications. The glass filaments used in the new screen were a spin-off of this technology. But inventing something is one thing. Turning it into a commercial success is quite another. We seem to be good in Britain at innovating things and completely fail in marketing them.
Yeah.
Are we going to be able to market this successfully?
Yes, that of course is a very good question. Our view is that we have to manage the exploitation just as well as we manage the research that leads to it. We've got to work out what the current technology can do, where it has a unique position, and so therefore where the customers are going to buy. And that has to be something that's as well managed, if not better managed even, than the research activity that's led to this product.
Are you really convinced this is going to be successful?
Personally, yes. I think this is one of the things that we must make work for Britain, and is a great tribute to the researchers in this laboratory.
What all this means is that we could have a high-resolution, non-flickering, portable, easily read screen the size of a piece of paper, or even larger, and all those cumbersome monitors will become a thing of the past. And there are new applications. How about having an online display for your overhead projector? The resolution's excellent. It's in black and white, but the most exciting thing is that they hope to have a small colour version available for test within the next few months.
And here's a mock-up of the sort of screen they're aiming at. We'll keep you in touch with any developments, particularly on that colour version. Of course, technology doesn't have to be brand new to be applied in an original fashion.
How many kinds of sweet flowers grow in an English country garden? I'll tell you now of some that I know, and those I miss you'll surely pardon.
There are 3,000 types of plants in this Hertfordshire garden centre, every one of them unique. They all bloom at different times, can grow to amazing heights, and some need specialist care. Choosing the plant that's just right for your garden can be a very real problem. There are so many variables: colour, season, height and price. And assuming you get that right, will the plant actually grow in your garden with its variables of soil type, drainage and position? Say you're looking for a plant with red flowers which blooms in autumn, grows to no more than 3 feet, is happy in the shade and doesn't demand all your attention. How on earth do you find such a plant? Well, you could consult an expert, but just when you want them, experts always seem to have their hands full. Alternatively, there are plenty of gardening books. But imagine how long it would take to leaf through all these volumes trying to root out exactly the right plant. It would take forever. This is the answer: a computerized database, an electronic catalogue of all the plants stored on a computer. The information is stored in a kind of electronic card index. Each plant has its own record, similar to a card, and on that record are details of its characteristics. Here's a new record, and it's being filled in just the same way as a new card is created. Each item or characteristic on the card is known as a field. But how does all this technology help you find that elusive plant, the one that matches precisely what you want and your garden can support?
Oh, yes, I do hope you can. I'm looking for a plant to fill in a gap in my garden.
What sort of thing was it you were looking for?
Well, something that doesn't cause me a lot of trouble.
Right, a shrub.
A shrub would be fine, yes.
Right, well, if you'd like, we can go through on the computer and maybe print you out a list.
Yes, please, that would be very helpful.
After the plant's details are fed into the computer, the system takes into account your garden as well.
Right, that's the, we've got the plant sorted out. Now the garden. What's the position that's going to be planted in, like?
Well, it's going to just be in part shade and part sun.
Is it exposed?
Not very exposed. There is a wall around the garden.
It's quite normal in between.
Yes.
And is it sunny, shady?
Well, no, it gets some sun and it's in the shade some of the day as well, so it's
Semi.
a bit of both.
Right, we'll put this through the computer. We should come out with a list.
Thank you very much.
The computer now has all the information it needs to start a thorough search of every plant, looking for an exact match. In this case, it's found half a dozen plants which fit the bill precisely. Armed with a printed list, the customer can then go off and see which plant she likes.
There we are.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
In fact, because the computer is so thorough, searching every record for a match, it will probably come up with a few suggestions that even the experts might have forgotten. It was Barry Tyler's idea to computerize the garden centre. It was a gamble. It always is when you're the first to try something, but it's been enormously successful.
The prime reason for introducing the computer was because we found that the customers were asking the same 20 or 30 questions, and as plants fall into certain categories, we could categorize them and put them onto a computer. The staff, we find, like it very much indeed. We have knowledgeable staff on the premises, but of course they do have to have days off. And when the staff aren't here, the staff with perhaps slightly less knowledge have a lot more confidence in answering customers' questions. They can go to the computer, key in the appropriate number, and bring all the information about that plant up onto the screen, and the customer can read it, have it in writing, or whatever they like. They have accurate information. The advantages are perhaps twofold. The fact that we can get all our labelling done accurately, there are no abbreviations, no misspellings, and of course the sheer volume of labels that we produce is ideal for a computer. And the second reason is that customers can go away from our premises here with written information. They are absolutely delighted. They come back again and again. The staff get on with it very well indeed because it gives them a lot of confidence in what they're doing. It's positively excellent.
Well, if you're running a small business or perhaps a club or society, you have to keep track of a lot of information. The traditional way to manage this data uses reams of paper and a filing system to keep it all under control. At its simplest, a database is organised rather like a card filing system. This is a file of 154 flowers that we held in alphabetic order. And each card is a record, and the name, the Latin name, colour, height and so on are fields in that record. Now, if I want the details of one flower, say goat's beard, it's fairly easy. They're in alphabetic order, and I can quickly go through them like that, flipping through, looking for the name, and there it is, goat's beard, Aruncus sylvester, yellow, 200 and so on. But if I want all the yellow flowers over 1 metre high, then it's much more difficult. I've got to read every card, one after the other, from beginning to end, to sort out the yellow flowers over 1 metre high. It's a very laborious job and very boring. Fred?
Well, let's try to do the same thing on a simple computer database, the sort available for most home micros. First of all, I need to create that file. Well, here we are, create a file, that's option 1 here. Pop that in. Now, before I can enter any details of those plants, I must describe how each record will be organised. I've got to make a template, in other words, the equivalent to this blank card. This just shows the fields, the plant name, Latin name, colour and so on. Right, well, the computer's going to help me do all this. It's called initialising. It says how many fields will each record need? Well, the card has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them, so I enter 6. Then field number 1, what name is to be used to identify this field? Maximum 7 characters. Now, that's the first problem. I'm limited to 7 letters. Well, here we've got plant name on the card, but I'll just have to settle for plant, I suppose. Plant. And what is the maximum number of characters that it will need? Between 2 and 240. Now, that's the field length. The problem here, you see, is memory. All my data is going to be stored on a disk, and if I choose 240 characters, I'll soon run out of space. Well, I know that 35 letters will be long enough for a plant name, so I'll pop that in. And then it comes on to field number 2. What name is to be used for that? Well, it did say Latin name, but I'll settle for Latin, and so on. Well, you can see that this will take a few minutes. And once I've set up this template, that's when the real donkey work starts, filling in all the details for 150-odd plants. But fortunately, one of our stalwart backroom boys has done all that for me. So I can just move deftly to this other machine and say, here's one I started earlier. Now, you can see here that this is the 154th record, and putting in all those details took a couple of evenings, so it's quite a slog. There's still just a few fields to complete here. The soil, I know, must be fertile, and aspect should be sunny for this particular plant. And there it is, the database is now complete. So now I can do some useful things with it. For example, I can flick through the pages easily enough, but that's no great shakes. But I could get the machine to resort those records according to size or the soil type if I wanted. Anyway, let's solve Mac's problem. I want to find a tall yellow flower. So I want to search through this file. Now my crib card here tells me that a search is this key, F2, press that. Now I've got to put in the particulars of what I want. Well, I don't care what the plant is called. And I certainly don't care about the Latin name. The colour I do mind about, that's got to be yellow. And the height, well, that's got to be tall, let's say over 100 centimetres. Well, that's the sign for greater than 100. Soil and aspect, oh, well, let's say I don't care about those. OK, and off it goes. Now, this will take nearly a minute, and that might come as a bit of a surprise. But you see, the computer is looking at every record like this. It's going through saying, there's a yellow one, but it's not tall enough. OK, well, here's a tall one, but it's not yellow. Oh, here's one that's both tall and yellow. And then it earmarks that. But, of course, to do that, it has to examine all 154. OK, but why is it taking so long? Well, this particular micro has a very limited memory for that kind of work. All the time it's pulling data in and out from the disk here, and that's what's taking the time. Now, in fact, although that's not ideal for a studio demonstration, it's no great problem, really. You can always pop and make a cup of tea. Anyway, that should be nearly up now. I timed this out earlier today, and it was 46 seconds. Yes, there we are. And the records found are 6. There are 6 plants in the database that might be suitable. Let's see what they are. The first one is goat's beard, as we suspected, yellow, 200 centimetres tall. The next one is, what? Sunflower, also yellow, also 200 centimetres tall. So you see, it may be a simple system, but it can have practical uses. It's very cheap, it's easy to use, and it's flexible. So a home database like this would probably be up to cataloguing, say, your stamp or your record collection. The drawback is it's slow. You could end up drinking an awful lot of tea.
With real business applications, speed is more important. Files are going to be bigger and much more complex. Business machines now use 16 or even 32-bit processors with at least 500,000 characters of internal memory, so they can pull in more data at a time, usually from a 10 or 20 megabyte hard disk. The programs tend to be better written, probably in machine code for speed, and they can cost several £100s. Well, this is a 16-bit Nimbus machine, which is going to look through the same 154 records and extract yellow flowers over 1 metre high, and it's really quite rapid. Here we go. Already we've got goat's beard, there it is, and 154 records, 6 records, so it's very, very fast. Just about time for a sip of Fred's tea. Well, this is still only the simplest form of database, though, just the equivalent of a card file. Real business applications need more versatile systems. We'll be looking at the range of database packages available for business micros later in the series.
Nature is noisy, not only to the ears, but to the eyes. Walk through a forest, you'll see a million different kinds of trees and plants, and each one of them is a little different from all the rest. But beneath this amazing complexity, mathematicians are beginning to observe some simple conceptual structures. At first glance, this looks pretty complicated. But when you look again, you learn that its complexity derives from the repetition of a simple motif. It branches in several directions, branches again in several directions with pretty much the same angles, and again and again. Each small section is just a repetition of the previous one, but on a smaller scale. The mathematical term for this concept is self-similarity, and it's a structure that many things in nature display, from blades of grass to clouds in the sky. When computer graphics people talk about simulating reality, you hear the word fractals a lot. What's a fractal?
Well, I like to take an informal approach to fractals. Fractal for me is more of an adjective than a noun. A fractal object is one that exhibits self-similarity. A prime example is something like a fern. If you look at a small piece of a fern, its geometry looks very similar to the entire fern. That's a very straightforward example, exact similarity. When you go to other natural objects like trees, you start to see some deviations from that pattern. Leaves will be forming, but the idea of a branching where the geometry is similar at the tip as on the entire tree, that's the notion of fractal for me. As I said, it's more of an adjective. But as an overall quality, one notices this property in trees and in other forms of nature, such as clouds, waves, mountains. As you look closer and closer at an object, you see more and more detail. In a way, fractals is an approach to looking at natural objects like trees. In the past, mathematicians have considered surfaces and objects as very smooth shapes. They've ignored the fine detail. They've ignored roughness everywhere. This is a system designed for editing fractal trees. The system stores a representation of the tree, and notice on this particular tree is very geometric, straightforward. It doesn't look like a real tree, but it suggests the branching structure of a tree. There's a main stem, and from the main stem, 2 branches come out. And at each branch point, 2 new branches are coming out. The angle is the same everywhere, the number of branches are the same, strictly self-similar. This set of sliders allows us to vary the parameters of the branching. For example, we can change the branching angle, and by lowering the branching angle, all the branches change at once.
That's looking much more leaf-like, but it's still very regular.
Right. What we can do is we can change some more parameters, in particular the angle, the ratio between the stem and the side branches, to get a new set of shapes. And in this way, we can actually simulate a growth process. Here is a stem, a blade of grass, and as it matures, the branches come out and grow. Still very regular. Every branch is exactly like every other branch.
And that looks more natural, but it's still awfully precise because everything's the same length.
Right. Well, we've given the computer 30 or so numbers upon which to base the geometry, but it can randomly vary those numbers. By rolling the dice, the computer chooses new numbers at every branch point, so that now we're changing the length of the branches. So some of the branches are longer than others, randomly chosen by the computer. This creates a more organic feel to the picture. It simulates randomness in nature. In fact, it's starting to look a little bit like the shapes we saw in the garden earlier. The numbers are analogous to the gene in the plant. A plant has only a small amount of DNA, a small amount of genetic information, by which it has to describe its entire structure. It has to be very economical, and as a result, it repeats the same structure at all scales. This is one of the reasons why nature is so self-similar. In the computer, we want to do the same thing. We only have a few numbers. We can't set every branch. We just need to set the basic, simple description. The computer takes over for us and creates the complexity based on a simple structure. There's a sort of a data economy here, which mimics the logic of genetic economy in nature. I definitely look at nature a lot, and the evolution of this program started out with only a few parameters. And I would go out into nature and see things that would happen in nature that my program could not yet describe. So I needed to add new parameters. Initially, there was no helical twist. Everything was in a plane. I added a new geometric description. It takes a year to do a program like this because you have to see the trees in all its facets. You have to see the blossoms in the spring, the leaves in the summer, the colors in the fall, and the bare structure of the tree, showing its full branching in the winter. In addition to modifying the branching structure, we can control the actual geometry of the stem itself. And a lot of plants, ferns, will, when they grow, actually be curled up and open up this way. And once we curl up the stem into a little watch spring, we can actually pull the watch spring perpendicular to the plane of the spring.
Just like grabbing it and stretching it out like that.
It certainly will break your watch, but for many plants, it allows a vine, for example, to grow around another plant. By adding randomness, you can get more gnarly-looking trees like a cherry tree. With one set of numbers, we can get a great variety of trees with the same set of numbers.
Well, you've got the same basic structure for every single tree, but you just sort of roll the dice again, get a different set of numbers in it. But within limits?
We set how much randomness we want. Randomness is a parameter in itself. And in a way, we can perform an aesthetic selection. In nature, there's randomness, and natural selection chooses what species survive. On the system, we can spin the dice and make an aesthetic selection. This one looks right, so we will breed that tree.
Keep
Those
that
parameters are good. Save that one. The ones that don't look good, we throw out. In a way, I use this tool as a means of exploring geometry. I think you'll find a new way of doing science as a result of computer graphics. In the past, scientists have done experiments by writing a formula, setting up an experiment, and if the dial points to the right number, that proves the theory. Now people have pictures to prove their theory. If you set your parameters and the picture you come up with looks like the real thing, that shows that you understood the problem a little better. You've captured the essence of its structure.
Well, those trees were grown on DEC mini-computers, but you can grow your own on a micro. Here's a short fractal program using the BBC B. You can alter all the values just as they did on the film. Now, this one, for example, is asking how many levels of branching would you like? Well, I'll say 5 and set it going. This particular pattern will take about half a minute or so, but if you can spare half an hour, you could grow something more complicated. Here are some that we made earlier today. We've speeded up the process so you can see what's happening. You can choose the angle between the branches, a number of branches and so on. You can even choose the ratio of the branch to the side stem. And here's a slightly simpler one. Obviously, the more complex take longer to draw. You can also choose between random elements, as these have, and a symmetrical pattern like this simple one here.
We've adopted that program from one in this book, The Art of Microcomputer Graphics. The code's available with the program notes and details in the Radio Times, and we're hoping to have a Spectrum version. How about that? Next week, we'll look at how students in American universities have to develop computer skills, whatever their subjects, and ask why British universities are falling so badly behind.
But until then, let's bow out with the trees.